Hello students, theme of our lesson is History, State and Prospects Concentrated Milk Industry.
Milk, the full-fledged foodstuff created by the nature and constantly necessary for the person at any age. However, milk and many dairy products are perishable. For extension period of storage, they are preserved. The word preserve happens from Latin conserves, that means to keep. Indispensable condition of production of milk, canned food, is reserving a perfect product which, being diluted with water in the quantity equal removed from milk by its production, gives the product absolutely uniform with the milk serving initial material. Milk canned foods has a strategic importance. More than 70 years they are included in the nomenclature of foodstuff, which store in the state reserves. The reserve provides the food independence, being one of components of economic safety of the country. Milk canned food differs in high transportability. Also are used by a long period of storage for production wide range of dairy products: ice cream, yogurts, spreads, products for baby, dietary, medical foods, recombined products, and also in a candy store and other branches of the food industry. In recent years, range of traditional milk canned food was replenished, milk containing, restored, recombined. Features of technology of these products are also stated in a grant to which, according to terminological standards, it is given name Technology of Canned Food, Milk Processing Products. Methods of long preservation of milk were known far back in the past. In Heinrich Hahn's army at the beginning of the 13th century received milk powder when drying it on the sun, providing this the peculiar concentrated form of nutrients during long campaigns. In Italian traveler Marco Polo in the 14th century, one of the first presented to Europeans of data on the countries of Asia and mentioned such way of preservation of milk. Under Marco Polo's certificate, powdered milk was included into a day diet of Tatar soldiers. In Russia, knew about powdered milk at the end of 18th century. We find one of such certificates in the message of the member of Free Economic Society. The translator from the Mongolian language, Ivan Irish, published in works of this society for 1792. In the article Notice of a Natural Lacteal Flour, the author reports that on arrival in dairy he saw how Mongols froze milk on flat dishes and made for all winter great stocks of lactate blocks. Then the flour or ice of milk evaporated and the dairy flour turned out. The author of the notice personally made such experiments and specified that the dairy flour received by it was sweet tasty. He writes about possibility of restoration of milk in warm water and concludes that it voyage the dairy flour has to have excellent advantage. In 10 years, in works of the same society, there is article A staff doctor at Nerchinsk plants of Osip Krishevsky about powdered milk or dairy powder. The author reports that he knew from the inspector of the Irkutsk medical justice Dr. Rizlain of the original applied by Yakutsk way of production of powdered milk by freezing, which is subsequent drying on the sun. On the basis, the author of article in 1799 put the corresponding experience and, having received quite satisfactory results concerning quantity and safety of product, repeated experiment in 1800. Krishevsky writes that powdered milk is so nutritious as well as ordinary, and not size that is responsible useful to stock up with such milk during campaigns, especially where the fresh and nutritious food is required, and continues. It's necessary to think that Europeans don't know about such products Siberian yet. Irish and Krishevsky's way represents in a primitive form a way of drying a foodstuff by a sublimation method. Under Hoch's certificate, the first experiences in Europe and the USA on removal from milk of a part of water began to make in 20-30 years of the 19th century. As for receiving powdered milk in the way of freezing, experiments on this method and the first patient for it treats 70-80 years of the 19th century. That is 80 years later, after this way was twice described in the Russian literature. Thus the principle of the way patient, the American McIntyre, completely coincides with Erich and Krzyzewski's description given above. Hoch gives the following description of essence of a way of McIntyre. The skim milk powdered in flat vessels is frozen and with cold work from top to down. The ice layer, which formed from above, breaks stirring process until milk doesn't freeze in the form of flaked or similar to wheat grain. At the beginning of the 18th century, in Russia, also ways of thermal drying of milk were known. In Technological Magazine of the Russian Academy of Sciences for 1808, the message of future academician Kirchhoff about saving of milk and eggs for a long time is printed. Kirchhoff reported about results of the experiments made in St. Petersburg. Skim milk contains in the water to bath in a clay pot in second stirring to natural evaporation waters. The rest is reduced to powder and remains in the locked vessel. In 1810, there was a book of the Fresh Cook and Confectionery, Nicholas Appier, art to keep products of an animal and pathogenesis for many years. It opened a reliable method of conservation of product in tight container by means of thermal treatment. Appier's opening deserves special attention of the government of France and an award in 12,000 francs. Appier used the received award on the organization of industrial production of canned food. Having founded in 1812 Appier's house, 72 years old Appier was granted the title Benefactor of Mankind. The beginning of production in the USA of powdered natural milk without foreign impurity belongs to 1898. In 1916, production of powdered milk increased in industrial scales. It was preceded by development within several years of a dry product and technology of Grimmett, who took out the patent from the British government. Process consisted in addition of carbonic soda to fresh milk, in evaporation in open coppers at continuous hashing to a pasty consistency, addition of cane sugar, then mix was pressed in tapes between drums, was dried up and powdered. In the USA, successfully developed powdered malt milk, which represented mix of solids or wool milk and malt extract of wheat flour. New processes found broad factory application, having replaced the former. The industry of Russia of concentration of milk is the youngest among other branches which are carrying out milk processing. Before revolution, there were 2 small plants on output which could not be considered as an industry, as the quantity of the being issued production was extremely insignificant. It were Valdorsky and Kardimovsky plants. In 1831, design and the construction of concentrated milk plants was begun. In 1831, ost was entered as the obligatory, approved by all Union Committee on Standardization at Council of Work and Defense of the USSR, all Union standards dry cow's milk. Depending on initial raw materials, powdered milk was divided into the powder whole cow's milk, received by drying of whole milk, fat content not less 3.2%, and the powdered removed cow's milk received by drying of skim milk. In products normalized also acidity, not higher than 22 and 34, respectively for whole and skim milk. Solubility not less than 65%. Color white with a yellowish shade, tasty and a smell characteristic for this sort of milk, without foreign smack and a smell. The powdered milk containing was not allowed in food. The preserving substances. Second, salts of heavy metals, strangers to normal cow's milk of substances, and also with pollution sites, with color unusual for powdered milk, tasty and a smell, strongly packed musty and with a putrefactive smell, not meeting the requirements of specification of the present standard. In 1963, Sukhovsky, in 1964, cans plants of sweetened condensed milk was let in operation. In 1935, Yelitarovsky and further other plants of powdered milk plants were equipped with the latest equipment on the time. The concentrated milk industry developed exclusively quickly. If in 1932 production of powdered milk in the country made 34, in 1940 it's 31. During the Great Patriotic War, the concentrated milk industry suffered great losses. 6 large concentrated milk plants were destroyed. At tons after the end of war, restoration destroyed and preparation of construction of a new enterprises of the concentrated milk industry began. By 1948, production of milk canned food exceeded the level of the war 1940. The period from 1965 to 1966 time the most intensive development of the concentrated milk industry. The Союз Сервмолоко all-union association, which included 53 concentrated milk combines, was created. Technical recruitment is carried out them. The concentrated milk branch became the most modern in the dairy industry. By the end of the 8th century, the last century in the country, more than 300 plants of powdered skim milk and dry substitutes of whole milk for farm animals were entered, including 68 complete plants on development of this product were bought in Czechoslovakia. In 70 years of the last century, production of dry dairy products for baby, dietary and medical foods as a completely plants bought abroad. Istrinsky, Harolsky, Volkovsky, Baltsky, Sibaysky, etc. is mastered. In 2002, release of dry products, children's dietary and medical, there began the Nutritic company at again opened plants in Istra of the Moscow region. By production of products, they integrated approach to the solution of questions of food of newborns, children of chest and younger age, and also as adults needing special medical products is provided. In the product range of plants of 10 names. Aspiration of producers to reduce prime cost of the ready products led to emergency of new ways of development of the condensed product with sugar, without vacuum and evaporating devices and vacuum coolers, and also milk containing products with partial replacement of milk fat and milk protein with not dairy components. Work on problems or production of dry dairy products, the All-Russian Research Institute of the Dairy Industry, both other scientific organizations and higher educational institutions. Now the range of the concentrated and dried products are conservation of milk reached 80 names, along with the traditional developed milk containing and compound products. Data on production of milk canned food in Kazakhstan are provided. About 9% of the made milk raw materials are spent for production of milk canned food in Kazakhstan. The main directions of scientific research in the field of production of milk canned food. There are increase of ability of storage of milk canned food. Second, development of products of a functional purpose with the said properties, for example, powdered milk for production of products of baby food, the recombined product. Third, increase of concentration of solid in the condensed sterile milk. Fourth, increase of stability of fatty phase of canned food. Fifth, inclusion in the scheme of production of canned food membrane processing methods, nanofiltration, the return osmosis, and electrodialysis. Sixth, decrease in power consumption of processes of condensation and drying and losses of raw materials. Seventh, optimization of compounding and technology of dry substitutes of milk for farm animals. Prospects of the concentrated milk industry. Increase in production of the dry and condensed products of the increased ability of storage, the dry adapted products for baby food, dry serum substitutes, whole milk for farm animals with wide use of proteins of phytogenesis and dairy serums. Improvement of quality of products, profitability of production, optimum positioning in the market. Transition to multi-stage drying and condensation in film, vacuum, and evaporating devices. The conventional classification of canned food, products of processing of milk, do not exist. The offered classification partially considered recommendations about classification and also goes enact the national standard of the Russian Federation, milk and products of processing of milk, terms and definitions, corresponding to one of the international standards most important for world sector, Codex Stan 206, Codex General Standard for Use Dairy Terms. The general principle by which in this classification products of processing of milk are united in one class canned food milk processing products. A mass fraction of solids should not less than 20%. As essential sites for allocation of classification groups are accepted. First, a mass fraction of solids on this side, two subclasses of product are located. Dry, this is with a mass fraction of solids not less than 90%, and concentrated, including restored and recombined, with a mass fraction of solids not less than 20%. Second, a way of concoction of production on this side, the groups of dry products received by way of multi-stage contact, sublimation, drying are allocated. The concentrated products received by evaporation or freezing of water, concoction, and also restored and recombined products. Third, raw sides of products on this side products are broken into subspecies, the dairy, the milk containing, the dairy is a compound. For inclusion in the developed classification of the main types of the canned food developed in Russian milk processing products, the systemization of the concentrated and dry products presented in figure 2.2 and 2.3 is offered. Conservation is a given of ability to be stored without damage during a warranty period under the corresponding conditions. The processes leading to damage of foodstuff can be classified by three main types. The first is the physical, second the chemical, and the third the microbiological. BIOS, it maintains of natural protective factors. It's not a method of conservation, by not only the system of measures providing short-term preservation of fresh raw materials. For example, milk cooling as a factor of extension of a bactericidal phase. Anabiosis, delay, suppression of activity of microorganisms and physical and chemical processes by removal or binding of free moisture. The method of conservation of dry dairy products is based on the principle of xeroanabiosis. The condensed milk canned foods with sugar on the principle of an osmoanabiosis. Water, the most important component of foodstuff. Between water, chemical compounds, and biological structure of foodstuff, there are interactions of various character. Water in the dispersed environment for a metabolism of microorganisms in food and for chemical reactions. However, The general humidity of a product does not characterize participation of water in chemical and biological changes. Scott, the first Rees who in 1952 entered into scientific terminology concept activity of water and provided there is an interrelation between activity of water and growth of microorganisms, that the resistance of foodstuff to chemical and microbiological processes is defined not by their absolute humidity, but size of activity of water. Activity of water characterized its thermodynamical potentials, being function of moisture content of a product, its chemical composition and structure. Activity of water is considered an effective measure of concentration of the water in a product, creating the conditions available or not available to activity of microorganisms, chemical and fermentative reactions. High activity of water, optimal for microorganisms, favors to their reproduction and metabolic activity, including producing toxins. So, equal 50%, the skim milk condensed in the vacuum and evaporating device with a mass share of solids of 50%. The water decrease of the activity reached by removal of moisture at the condensation and drying provides anabiosis conditions. Still in the 20th, the last century, Hans Zicker notes, the quantity of the bacteria containing in powdered milk quickly decreases eventually. In certain cases, this reduction proceeds for 12 months. In other cases, it goes very quickly throughout the first 2-4 months of storage, then the quantity of bacteria remains to constant. For each species of microorganisms, there is a threshold of activity of water below which certain microorganisms don't develop. The majority of the microorganisms existing in the nature will breathe at activity of water ranging from 0.9 to 0.99. The indicator of activity of water in fresh milk is same. On the value of activity of water, minimum for growth, microorganisms sharply differ from each other through within a look the minimum activity of water is stable at all strains. Because of threat of food poisoning depends between activity of water and microbiological damage of foodstuff is extremely important. Infection foodstuff of Escherichia, Salmonella, and other microorganisms brings to people many troubles in the form of disorders of the digestive tract. The food intoxications caused by secretions of such microorganisms as Clostridium botulinum, Staphylococcus, Bacillus cereus represents a serious problem, sometimes with a lethal outcome. Many mold produce the extremely toxic substances with serious mutagen, neurotoxin, and allergic consequences. Measurement of activity of water is used to estimate quality and safety of foodstuff. Activity of water is normalized and defined in milk canned food in some foraging countries. If to follow ideal dependence, activity of water is in number equal to a molar share of water in solution. But in foodstuff, considerable deviation from this ideal dependence are observed. The indicator of activity of water allows to predict process of long storage of a product, chemical change, fermental activity, increase in micropopulation. It is possible to determine strategy of protection of a product by the size of activity of water, tightness of packing, storage temperature, moisture conditions, control and regions of separate species of microorganisms. It is so known that any of species of microorganisms does not, it is possible, breed at activity waters lower than 0.6, that fermentative activity amplifies at activity water higher than 0.1 0.7, but not fermentative darkening of products is activated at activity of water more than 0.3, 0.6. In figure 3.2, it is visually shown how activity of water influences various chemical and microbiological changes that are occurring in foodstuff. Abiosis, the complete cessation of all vital processes in raw materials and microorganisms provided in the different ways: thermal sterilization, application of antibiotics, the ultraviolet radiation, and other from which brought the particle application in production of foodstuff was found by only thermal sterilization. Elimination of microorganisms and even their dispute, it is reached by thermal sterilization at a temperature of 116 degrees Celsius during 15-18 minutes. Hermetically, the corked condensate the normalized dairy mixes. At such processing, there are irreversible changes in photoplasm, which proteins coagulate that conduct to a rupture of a cytoplasm cover and death of microbic cage. For example, in the condensed sterilized milk. Sterilized product remains, tightness of packing is not broken yet. Conclusions. Ability of storage of canned food, products of processing of milk is defined. Indicator of activity of water or mode of thermal sterilization. Lack of yeast and mold or microflora of a secondary dissemination. Lack of not drawn up enzymes. Tightness of container. Observance of guaranteed storage conditions, temperature, duration, and relative humidity of air. Components and their influence on quality of canned food. A development of canned food used: first, milk; second, milk processing byproducts, skim milk, buttermilk, serum; third, dairy products, dry whey milk fat; fourth, substitutes of milk fat; fifth, vegetable proteins; sixth, functional necessary components, carbohydrates, emulsifiers, enzymes, vitamins, biologically active additives, etc. General requirements to milk: compliance to the existing standard on crude milk, on organoleptic and physical and chemical indicators; compliance to technical regulation on milk and the dairy production on safety indicators; compliance of the technological instruction and to the standard on a certain type of a product. For example, a development of some dry products for baby food, technological instruction order milk use only of the premium. Special requirements to milk for conservation: head stability, specific structure of microflora, minimum content psychotrophny, osmophilny, and sporoafrosa microflora, Russian cabbage soup. Freshness of milk and exception of its long storage before processing. Head stability ability of milk to keep the initial colloid dispersion properties of proteins under action, the increased temperature 115-140 degrees Celsius. Processing not of heat-resistant milk is allowed by the thermal coagulation of proteins, receiving products of non-standard consistency, loss of components of dry raw materials on a surface of heat exchange devices. At production of powdered instant milk from not heat-resistant raw materials, quality of a ready-made product sharply decreases. Agglomeration by repeated wetting, the causing receiving large agglomerates does not improve quality of a product. Head stability of milk is controlled on alcoholic test at development of canned food, which technology provides the most rigid thermal treatment. The condensed, the sterilized milk, dry dairy products of baby food, sweetened condensed milk by a line method, and also the powdered milk used for development of the restored and recombined products in which head stability is normalized. Head stability of milk has to be not below the second group. According to the theory developed by Diriagin, Landau, Fairway, Aberbeck, stability of colloidal system depends on a ratio of molecular forces of an attraction and electrostatic forces of pushing away between colloidal particles. Depending on prevalence of these or those forces, total energy can have positive or negative value. At great values of a power barrier, the colloidal system is steady and particles cannot form units. At reduction of barrier, the probability of their coagulation increases. Active acidity of fresh milk, 6.6, 6.8 pH, less than 6.6 testifies to accumulation of free lactic acid. Lactic acid in milk reduces a negative charge as H+ ions suffers dissociation of free the carboxyl groups and acid groups of phosphoric acid of casein. SOO groups pass into SOON and PO3 groups into H2. As a result of this transition, a quantity of positive and negative charge is reached. At pH equal 4.6, 4.7, there comes the isoelectric condition of casein in which macromolecules of protein lose the solubility and stability. The standard on milk raw materials and technological instructions of production of canned food regulate acidity of milk known in units and in turns degrees. At increased acidities of milk more than 18 degrees Turner, each degree of Turner corresponds 0.009% equal 0.01% of free lactic acid. Standard and technical documentation on the majority of canned food defines acidity of milk raw materials within 18-20 degrees Turner. More strict requirements, acidity till 18-90 degrees Turner, are shown to milk at production of powdered milk. The condensed sterile milk and dry products for baby food. The mechanism of influence of head stability of milk of ions of calcium is in binding free IT groups of the phosphoric acid that reduces a negative charge micelles casein. The electroneutral particles of protein aggregate and formation of calcic bridges accelerate this process. When heating transition of primary and secondary phosphates in tertiary and hydrolysis of organic phosphates with release of H+ of ions and charged pH is also used. Influence of head stability of milk of the content of lactose was not considered earlier. But in the presence of oxygen, under action head organic acids, mainly and are formed of lactose that is also followed by uncharged pH. As appears from stated action of head stability of both salt structure and lactose when heading showed decreased pH, decrease in a negative charge of KKFK and the electrostatistical forces of publishing away between colloidal particles. Concerning proteinaceous composition of milk, it is known that property high head stability defines the casein, which is among the few known to science thermostable food proteins and the maintaining heating at 140 degrees Celsius within 60 minutes and more. Head stability of casein depends on the size of micelles of a casein, and they are more small, especially thermostatic milk and nanoborate. It is caused by the different contents in micelles too, casein and colloidal phosphates of calcium. Small micelles of casein contain more to casein, less colloidal phosphate. Thermostatic to casein possesses a high charge and strong hydrophilic properties and stabilizes casein micelles colloidal phosphate of calcium, possessing the cementing properties. On the contrary, promotes aggregation of particles of casein. Ceremal proteins, rather of a thermolabile, and many of them are completely denaturate at 90 degrees Celsius within 10-30 minutes. Low head stability of ceremal proteins speaks existence in metals of the order secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structures stabilized by disulfide, as the communication sensitive of heating. The thermal denaturation of ceremal proteins is connected with an activation of SH groups, is connection with a rupture of molecular SS communications and expansion of peptide chains. Alpha-lactoalbumin and beta-lactoalbumin not head resistant equally. Alpha-lactoalbumin does not contain sulfurylene groups, but possesses 4 disulfide communications on each molecule. It allows to assume that alpha-lactoalbumin and form intermolecular complexes that lead to protein destabilization. The partial denaturation of ceremal proteins is not in a varying degree at all modes of thermal treatment. However, it does not give usually visible change in view of small sizes, the small content of ceremal proteins, and because of an attachment of stable cation metals. Noticeable influence of ceremal proteins on a head stability can be at increase in their contents. In this case, there is an aggregation of KKFK with beta-lactoalbumin, or the proteins of serum denaturated by warm serve as material of bridges between KKFK particles that is followed by substantial increase of viscosity. The raised content of ceremal proteins is not in colostrums. In day of an OTL to 11%, therefore within 7 days the after of an OTL milk is not subject to acceptance on plant. Specific structure of microflora. Firmness in storage of milk cannot food depends as on the total maintenance of microorganisms in milk raw materials and character of a bacterial landscape, that is specific structure of microflora. When receiving milk on a farm, the structure of its microflora it is formed, generally at the expense of microflora of the equipment. As a rule, these are lactic streptococci, 50–95%, bacteria of group of Lactobacilli about 10%, micrococci to 10%. It is clear that then the bacterial disseminations of the crude is higher than milk, that present high probability is mute the pathogenic and other microorganisms which can lead to development of non-standard products. However, a development of canned food special value has existence and quantity in milk of psychrophilni, psychrotophni, and asthmaphilni, and the dispute forming microflora. As Viridenko notes, heat in milk of several tens kg of sporous anaerobic microorganisms can make it unsuitable for development of canned food. The dispute forming microorganisms perish only at the influence of temperature of 150–120 degrees Celsius within several minutes. Second, it is impossible to influence them the concentration of the disinfecting substances allowed in the dairy industry. Third, as the accepted modes of thermal treatment, destruction dispute does not provide it. Different types of bacillus lead to bombage of cans with the condensed products of folding, formation of bitter and sour tasty. They develop the toxins causing the wood poisoning. Semination sources bacilli, skin of an udder of cows, the milkmaid's hands, milking glasses, raw forage and straw. The raising the contents dispute in air. Broad application of cooling and refrigerating storage of milk, thus psychrophila and psychotropha of one of the main ecological groups of crude milk. Psychophilny and psychotrophy microorganisms are capable to develop at low temperatures up to 0 degrees Celsius, but they differ in values of an optimum and maximum temperature of development. Optimum temperature of development, psychrophilny microorganisms of 12-16 degrees Celsius, maximum 20 degrees Celsius. Optimum temperature of development of psychotrophy microorganisms of 20-30 degrees Celsius, maximum 35-42 degrees Celsius. The psychotrophic microflora of the crude cooled milk is presented by generally gram-negative aerobic bacterium of childbirth, Pseudomonas, alkaligens, Achromobacter, Flavomobacterium, and also insignificant quantity of micrococci and other species of microorganisms. In a quantitative sense, the prevailing group of psychotrophic bacteria is the sort Pseudomonas. According to a number of researchers, the majority of psychotrophic bacteria possess proteolysis and lipolysis properties. The high maintenance of psychotrophic microorganisms often is not reflected at once in taste and smell of milk. At the storage of crude milk, enzymes of psychotrophic microorganisms can cause uncontrollable hydrolysis of milk fat and change of a casein complex, decrease in a relative proportion B casein and the general casein. Presence at a crude milk of such psychotrophic microorganisms as Pseudomonas fluorescens can become the deterioration reason during a product expiration date, even at destruction of initial bacteria at pasteurization. By results of our research conducted in the 19th years of the last century, under the leadership of Professor Gutkov, in sample of sweetened condensed milk, that developed from milk with the maintenance of psychotroph more than 11 cm. After 3 months, storage was marked out some increase in peptide fraction, decrease in resistance to gelling, deterioration of organoleptic indicators. In 6 months of storage of organoleptic indicators, food did not conform to requirements of GOST. Psychrophilny microorganisms don't come to light on test with the rizazurin. The milk corresponding on this test to the first class may contain to 9.2 increased 10. Psychotrophic microorganisms. An indirect indicator of the high maintenance of psychotrophic microorganisms, the increased quantity of cyanotic cages. Besides, both in fresh and in the stored milk with a raised maintenance of somatic cages, concentration of free fatty acids increases. The quantity of psychrophilny bacteria depends on sanitary conditions in which receive and transport milk, from a temperature and duration of storage of milk before processing, quality of water. Psychrophila are capable to fast formation of colonies of surfaces of the dairy equipment. Special danger is constituted by the capacities which are not fully emptied from milk, the previous parties. Thus there is an infection with a large number of well-adapting active cases of psychrophilny microorganisms. Osmophilny microorganisms. Bacteria of the sort Staphylococcus, yeast, mold, mushrooms, for example, the chocolate brown mold of Catenularia fuligina, causing irrigation buttons in sweetened condensed milk, and other microorganisms viable at low activity of water. They can be activators of defects of sweetened condensed milk, process acid-forming activity, emit sushi enzymes. The prevention of heating milk of osmophilny microorganisms is reached by observance of sanitary and hygienic conditions of milking. The modes of sanitary composing of all milk or the carrying out parts of milking machines, cistern, processing of air in milking rooms. Staphylococcus can get to milk from the cow sick with mastitis. The crude milk containing a small amount of microbes results of an effective sick and disinfection of the equipment for receiving, collecting and transportation of milk on plant, observance of conditions of milking, the indicator of health of dairy herd. Freshness of milk. Long storage of milk before processing has to be excluded. Storage of crude milk at delivers at a temperature from 2 to 6 is allowed during 24 hours, taking into account transportation time. However, it is necessary to consider that the increase in duration of storage of milk before processing on 12 hours is followed by increase much in the maintenance of psychotrophic microorganisms. Buttermilk. As a raw materials, the buttermilk received a production of sweet cream butter can be applied to milk canned food. Taste and smell of buttermilk has to be dairy with smack of pasteurization, pure or with whack of fodder smack. Color from white to light yellow, uniform on all weight. The requirements to consistent uniform liquid without deposit and flakes. Physical and chemical indicators of buttermilk. A mass fraction of solids not less than 8%, including fat of 0.3–0.7%. Acidity no more than 18%. Density not less than 1027 kg delight matter. Serum. Types of serum raw materials: sub cheese, unsalted and salty, cottage cheese, casein. Characteristic of tasty and smell: sub cheese, unsalted serum, tasty and a smell, peculiar to way, sweetish. Sub cheese, salty serum, the tasty and a smell, peculiar to way, saltish. Cottage cheese and casein serum, tasty and a smell, to way, sourish. On appearance and a consistent serum, uniform liquid is allowed existence of a proteinous deposit. Color of ceruleum, the pale green.
This concludes our lesson. Thank for attention.